I'm glad everyone can make it here today. We're going to be discussing natural pest control. Please throw in any questions at any point in time. We'll get through as much of the questions as we can. And at the end of the presentation, I'll throw up my website and email address. So if we don't get through any questions, or you've got any more questions that are really long and we don't run out of time and can't answer just here and now, I will answer them personally through email. And if they're really, really amazing questions that everyone will love, i.e. the world, because I run an international website, deepgreenpermaculture.com, I will write an article around your question and show the world the answer and share it with everybody. So let's get started. I will share the presentation out and we will commence. Okay, so today we're going to talk about natural pest control using integrated pest management principles, otherwise known as IPM. It's a scientific system for managing pests, and it's a system that works with nature, with ecology. So I'm really excited about that because I'm a sustainable gardener. I write for Good Organic Gardening Australia magazine. I'm their backyard permaculture writer. Permaculture is ecological garden design, if anyone's wondering. So I always like to work with nature and work in harmony with all the living species that we have and use them to our advantage. So what we're going to be doing is looking at ways that we can maximize the beneficial insects in our gardens and minimize the conditions for bad bugs and use low environmental impact products in our garden. So let's get started. Now, most people are familiar with what we call conventional pest control, basically what everyone does, what they do on farms. There are a few issues with conventional pest control methods. Typically, chemicals are used as the first resort or the first option. Now, those chemicals are usually quite harmful ones as well, and they really don't address the cause of the problems. People just see a pest and, okay, grab the chemicals, let's spray. The other thing, it's not strategic, it's not preemptive, not preventative. Essentially, it's usually done on a routine schedule basis. Like on farms, I would say, okay, at the start of spring, we spray this chemical this many times at this amount, and we just repeat it and so forth. That doesn't really look at what's going on in the environment where we're actually trying to control the pests. So we have a far more strategic system such as IPM, which we're going to use. Now, we're going to look at the 7 main issues with the chemical pest control methods. First and foremost, most people don't realize when you go out, grab the most powerful chemicals you can off the supermarket or hardware store or garden nursery shelf and spray them, you don't really deal with the problem, because if that worked on farms, we wouldn't have pests anymore. They would be extinct. Obviously, they don't totally get rid of pests. They only provide a temporary fix, and over the long term, they don't really control the pests. Because what we find, well, what scientists have found is that when we use powerful chemical sprays, the pests are a little bit more resilient than the beneficial insects which actually control them. So what you end up doing is killing all the beneficial insects that keep them in check, and you have this explosion of the pests, because all it takes is 1 or 2 pests to survive. They breed, they pass on the resistant genes, and you end up getting resilient pests that no longer are affected by your pesticide. Now, the danger of using the most powerful pesticide first is that if you've used it and then it doesn't work, you've got nowhere left to go, which is a real problem. Now, what most people don't realize is that on farms, they don't just use one pesticide, they use many and they rotate through them. If I was to buy a pesticide from, say, a garden nursery, just a regular synthetic, quite toxic pesticide, and I look at the label, it wouldn't say terribly much. It'll just tell you about how often to use it, what it works on, and that's about it. what if I was to get exactly the same product from an agricultural supplier, we get something very different. We get this big long label. This is only a portion of a label of a product that you can actually buy from your local, even supermarket, possibly, definitely your local hardware store or garden nursery. And this little excerpt, which is this massive long paragraph, is one of about 20 pages of descriptions and legal disclaimers. What the gist of this is, essentially it's classed as a group for an insecticide because they have different groups of insecticide. And what the agricultural chemical supplier actually tells you is that this is a member of this group of insecticides, and you can't keep on using any of one group consistently because, as I've highlighted, the resistant individuals can eventually dominate the insect population. In other words, it'll stop working and you have to use other products from other groups to rotate to stop them getting resistant. And they also say further down, which I didn't include, that if you have your multi-million-dollar crop of, say, soybean, and you've been using this insecticide and they become resistant, they wipe out your crop, they are not legally liable for your losses. So, of course, they don't care about your backyard garden, so they don't give you all this information. And the chances are that if you lose your crop of beans in your backyard, you're not going to sue the large chemical corporation for your losses of several dollars of beans. So they don't bother telling you that. But what they expressly state on these is that insects will become resistant if you keep on using the same chemical. So you have to stop using it and use different ones and constantly rotate. So let's go back to our 7 reasons why we don't like to use all these chemicals. The other thing is environmental toxicity, which we can describe in several ways. If you use chemicals, they can hang around. Some of them can hang around in the soil for a very long time. We call it persistence. If anyone remembers all the issues with DDT way back decades ago, that stuff now completely banned, survives for decades in the soil. There's that also bioaccumulates, which means, and many other pesticides do, where if the insects basically eat it, accumulate in their bodies, something eats them, it gets concentrated in whatever eats them, and something eats that, it gets concentrated even more. So what you end up doing is accumulating large quantities in things that are at the end of the food chain, which is really bad. Another problem with environmental toxicity is what we refer to as soil mobility. A lot of pesticides are very soluble in water. So if you apply them in a certain spot and you have overhead irrigation or it rains, they can wash away and they can move off-site to other areas. They can eventually also end up in waterways or percolate down through the soil into groundwater and contaminate groundwater. So they can cause many issues. Issue number 5 is that a lot of them are non-specific. A specific pesticide is something that will kill only a particular insect and nothing else. Many of them are non-specific, so if you spray them, they can actually affect non-target species. They can also poison things that are nowhere near related to target species, such as people, pets, or native animals. And another reason why both professionals and councils and even individuals shouldn't be using chemicals, there's an increased social awareness about environmental toxicity of chemicals to wildlife, to waterways, and so forth. And a lot of people also are mindful about the food that they put into their bodies, and they usually buy organic food because it hasn't been sprayed. That's what basically organic food is, something that hasn't been sprayed with pesticides or been grown with synthetic chemical fertilizers. So it's really important, if you're going to grow your own food, to not contaminate it. So these are very good reasons why pest controls, standard pest controls, conventional ones, are problematic. So we have some solutions. And of course, the biggest problem, which is why your veggies cost so much, if you're wondering, it's not because of the labor that they're putting into growing your veggies. it's really just those pesticides that they have to rotate through constantly because they use the cheapest, nastiest fertilizers they can actually buy. Because when you're fertilizing hundreds of acres of fields, you don't want to spend too much money on fertilizer. You get the cheapest, nastiest stuff that's available and usually wrecks the soil, but that's another whole issue. But what we've got to be aware of, they're constantly rotating through all those chemicals. They cost an absolute fortune. And even if you were to buy, your regular garden center type pest products, they're still quite costly. They're going to be about, 20 to 30 bucks for a bottle as well. So it's money that could be better spent elsewhere. And I'm hopefully going to give you some low-cost solutions or no-cost solutions where you can actually get better results over the long term. So if you were a farmer and you were to hire a consultant to come and tell you how to minimize your pests, they would probably be entomologists or ecologists or something along those lines, or horticulturists or agriculturists. And they would normally tell you about a system called integrated pest management. So it's essentially a strategic scientific system where the whole approach to pest control is based on the principles of prevention, monitoring, and control. And the way it increases its effectiveness over just simple chemical controls is that in IPM, what we do is we combine many, many techniques together. We'll discuss the various kinds of techniques in a second, but the whole point with IPM is that we can, say, have a control that's 80% effective, another one's 20% effective, another one's 50% effective, another one's 5% effective, another one's 2% effective. When we combine them, we get a cumulative effect. So we get a multi-pronged approach and we have greater success that way. And with IPM, we don't look to try to make an insect extinct, which can't be done, as we know from the history of agriculture. We can make lots of native species extinct that are not harmful, but we can't make pests extinct. They're really tough. That's why they're pests, and they also eat our food. Now, what we could also do is take a strategic approach where we don't look for elimination. What we want to do is control the level of damage down to what's acceptable. If you're a farmer economically, if you're basically a homeowner, what's tolerable in terms of what damage you're willing to take in your garden. Because it might not actually, the damage might only be cosmetic. It might ruin a few leaves, but it won't stop the plants producing. So you've just got to think about that. Or it might create some blemishes, which might not be okay in a vegetable that's sold in a supermarket, for example. But if it's your own, you just chop that bit off. It's not going to matter too much. And so we use all these strategies to reduce the amount of pesticides that we use overall, and we minimize the risk to people, the environment, and also when talking about your home, your children and your pets as well. And when we're talking about the environment, it also implies native species. If anyone's wondering what that little picture is down below, that's a parasitic wasp. It's a little native wasp that actually controls pests, and it's on a calendula flower, which is a daisy-like flower, and it's an edible flower. And it self-seeds, and you can put those in your veggie patch. You buy them once, you never have to buy them ever again. They're pretty, you can eat the flowers, and they attract beneficial insects, and it adds a bit of colour to your garden too. Now, how does IPM work? Well, we'll go through all the different aspects of integrated pest management now. First and foremost one is prevention. The way we manage pests long-term is we prevent their damage. If you think about chemical controls, they're usually reactive. You see a pest in your garden, you go to the supermarket, you buy something, you spray it. That's acting after the fact. What we want to do is take a very proactive approach in IPM, understand what environmental factors are essentially going to encourage the pest, assist it to breed, multiply, and become a problem in our garden. So then what we do is then we reverse those conditions to make it as difficult for the pest as possible. So we try to discourage the pest from establishing itself in the first place. The other thing we do is we monitor. We actually check what type of pest is affecting the garden, how many of them are present, and how much damage they're causing. because the worst thing you can do is use a chemical that doesn't work on that pest, and it's costing money, it's poisoning the soil, the environment, everything else in your veggies, and it's not going to do anything. That would be an absolute waste of money. So we try to figure out exactly what we're doing, why, and to be able to do that, we need to identify the correct. We need to correctly identify what the pest is, and then figure out what are the best approaches to manage that pest, which we'll discuss at the end of this presentation. So once we've gone through all these different checks to understand what the problem is, then we've got to decide, is the problem tolerable? Is it really a problem, or do we actually need to control the pest that we're seeing? So what we can do, we can set thresholds where we act. We can set a threshold where we say, okay, if we have a certain amount of damage or a certain amount of pests, or if certain things are being damaged in the garden, that's when we act. Otherwise, we can just leave it. Sometimes if you just leave it, nature will do the rest of it without you having to do anything. But if your garden environment is so degraded that there isn't enough wildlife to actually control the pests, we can actually encourage them later on. Now, with IPM, when we decide what we're going to do, we can employ a variety of controls. We aren't restricted to just chemicals. Chemicals are just one approach. And within the chemical controls, there are environmentally safe ones, increasingly all the way up to really dangerous ones, which we hopefully don't ever want to use. And we usually shouldn't be using at all, because I think it would be hard to justify the outcome of that. So when we're devising what measures we're going to put into place, we can choose biological controls. We're going to go through these where we can get other living organisms to control the pest. We can use cultural controls where we create an environment that's not favorable to the pest. We can use mechanical and physical controls such as traps and barriers. And then we can use chemical controls, which are, like I said, on a spectrum from totally environmentally safe to totally environmentally damaging and should be avoided. And we usually pick the ones on the least harmful end of the scale for that. But we don't use the chemicals off the bat. The chemicals are usually the last resort when all the other things haven't worked, and we can mix and match our solutions. So, as I said, we don't go for the chemicals first. What we do is we can use the most cheapest, easiest, most easily implemented solutions, and a combination of them if necessary. And if they don't work, then we escalate. Then we can go harder, nastier, more dangerous if we have to, but we usually don't. Now, because we're not using the chemicals first, we're involved in prevention, monitoring, and control. What we're going to do is we're going to model the solution based on what we understand about the pest. We're going to understand something about the life cycle of the pest, what conditions it favor its thriving, what conditions are detrimental to it, and we will basically make adjustments to our environment, to our garden, so we can get the greatest effectiveness out of whatever techniques we use. And we can use a combination of those, like I've said here, we're just reiterating and summarizing. And ultimately, what we want to do is have realistic goals about what we want to do in terms of pest control. For example, a lot of people have snails in their gardens. You will never, ever eliminate snails, but you can stop them damaging your plants, and you can maybe have them just damaging a few ornamentals instead somewhere else, or you can actually put other plants for them to damage, which we'll talk about in a second, which will be decoy plants, which is part of companion planting, where you can actually lure them away from the plants that you want to preserve. Through all these measures, we can ultimately reduce the amounts of pesticides that we do use. Now, it looks like a few people have thrown some questions up. Now, yeah, earwigs. Yep. I will be talking about earwigs in a second. A lot of people have trouble with earwigs coming and chewing up their gardens. And here, someone's mentioned that you can use the oil, soy traps, and newspaper. I will talk about how to get those to work, because I've managed to get those to work. And okay, there's 2 Q&As. Backyard veggie garden seems to be taken over by armies of harlequin bugs. Yes, they're those stink bugs or sap-sucking bugs. I found a plant that actually controls them and directs them away. They're pretty easy to control as well. When we get into the pests, I will talk about the specific insects. You will find that you can use 1 or 2 safe chemical controls to literally control 90% of things you ever encounter in your garden. So it doesn't have to be so daunting. I'll keep it simple. So let's start with just the basic controls that you can implement. We'll start with the mechanical and physical controls. So the point of these are to basically create barriers to block pests, to stop them getting to your plants, or to actually kill them before they get to your plants. Now, there's a range of methods that come under physical controls. The simplest ones are manual removal of the pests, hand removal, where you just lift up the leaves, you know where to look, and you can pick the pests off. If you look at the cabbage white butterflies, the little white butterflies with 2 black dots on their wings, which have those big green caterpillars, you will see plants, the leaves all eaten. They're always eaten from the edges. That's how you know it's a caterpillar, because snails have a little raspy tongue that can rasp through the middle of a leaf. Earwigs will also make small raspy holes, but they won't leave the snail trails. That's how you tell those apart. But what you can do, you lift up the leaves, you look at the midrib of the mid-vein. You have the veins on the leaf and you have the midrib, which is where they all branch off. You lift that up, you'll usually find a caterpillar lying vertically along. That's how it disguises itself. And you can usually pick them off. They grip a bit hard. It's like pulling Velcro. Peeling Velcro, they have little claws and they grip, but you can just peel them off. And if you've got chickens, you can feed them to them, or if you've got fish, they eat them too. Just make sure you haven't sprayed them with anything. So they can easily be hand-picked too. Now, if you are dealing with diseases like leaf curl on peaches and nectarines, because I do IPM covers both diseases and pests and weeds as well. You can pick up all infected leaves. If you've got things like the little silver trails inside your citrus leaf from citrus leaf miner, you can cut those leaves off, put them in a plastic bag and throw them in your landfill bin. Don't put them in your recycle bin or your compost bin under any circumstances. You'll just spread the pests. And with things like aphids on roses, you can usually just get a little bit of pressure on the hose and just hose the little guys off. Now, one of the best methods that I've had working is netting. Netting is a form of barrier. You can see the apples in the second picture down below. They're wrapped in a little insect exclusion net mesh bag. So it's essentially a drawstring bag. It's a 30 by 30 centimeter bag. You can put it over the fruit. You can put it over your tomatoes, or you can put it over your apples or whatever, or bunches of grapes, and you tie it. Birds can't get in, possums can't get in, butterflies and moths can't get in, and even Queensland fruit fly can't get in. So they're really, really effective. And they're about $7 for 10 of them. You get a few bags of them and you'll have enough to cover literally everything. Barriers also include things like glue bands on trees, which we can see pictured in the third photo down below. Glue bands are essentially a sticky, greasy strip that goes around your tree trunks and stops insects climbing up the tree trunk, which will stop aphids, it will stop codling moth, and it'll stop a few other bits and pieces too, which we'll go into later on. You could also use things like fence spikes, which are the thorny devil spikes that you can see in the last picture. It's an Australian product and it does work against possums. I've given them to friends and they've tried them and it's repelled the possums, but the possums went down into their veggie garden, so we have to cover it with netting. Electric fences also work. We can also use mulch as a barrier for weeds. And there's also some things that we can spray or put down on the ground or onto the soil, which will repel pests and stop them crossing. A few other physical controls are traps. On the far left-hand side, we can see that little red TP-shaped trap. that is a codling moth trap. It has a little pheromone scent in the little container in the middle. It's a little rubber cup basically, and it has a tiny amount of a substance which attracts all the male codling moths. They all go stick there and they get eliminated, so they can't breed with the females, and it stops their breeding cycle and limits the pests. We've all seen the yellow sticky traps for your citrus, the gall wasp. With those traps, I believe these days it's a legal necessity that they have to have a barrier over them. They sell them with barriers over them. If you have got ones that don't, there's instructions on my website how to use some mesh and some jar lids to make a little cage that you can put them in, so native animals won't get stuck on them. But you have to make sure you twist the top open so the little hole opens up at the top so the scent can come out. Otherwise, it's just a sticky piece of plastic. There are also traps for Queensland fruit flies, such as the echolure trap. It's another pheromone trap. Attracts the male fruit flies and breaks the breeding cycle. There's things like the snail traps as well. You can also use tree banding as a trap, not just a barrier. There's also the earwig traps, which someone mentioned earlier in the questions, which we'll look at in a second. There's also other physical controls, which are really simple, based on heat. If anyone's seen the people who do the bushland regen, how they have the flaming wands and they essentially flame weeds, all that does is essentially cooks the weed and kills it. You can use that same principle to get rid of weeds on your driveway, or in cracks in concrete, or in paving where there's no garden. Or you can just boil up the kettle and pour boiling water. Boiled veggies never come back to life, and neither do boiled weeds. So you can just use boiling water if it's not in the garden. You could also use a steamer if you want. Some people have commercial steamers which do the same thing. And in farms, they use steam sterilization for diseases such as nematode, which is a root disease. It looks like a microscopic little worm. And what that does is it gets into the roots and ruins your tomatoes and things. So, but there's also biological ways to do that. That's a question floating there, I can see. Rats eating veggies. Yes, we will be talking about rats. And yes, they do eat vegetables, corn, pumpkins. They will eat virtually anything. And you cannot bait rats if you live near wilderness corridors, if you're back onto a creek, or if you're further out like you guys are, where there's lots of wildlife, whether there's, think of all the things that eat rats and mice. So they would be things like eagles, falcons, hawks, owls. They will all eat them. Also, if neighbors have dogs, they will also eat poisoned rodents too. Cats don't eat them because cats are not scavengers. They will only kill fresh living things that they will only eat something that they've freshly killed. But dogs will normally eat them. So if you've got dogs, or your neighbors have got dogs, you cannot bait your rats. Snakes also eat them, so I don't think it'll be too good for native snakes either. And not all snakes are venomous, just be aware, and some snakes control other snakes, so you don't really want to be poisoning them. We'll go into rodents in detail, but you can use cage traps, or you can use baited traps. The cage traps are another mechanical control, as are the lethal traps, and as are possum cages. And hopefully everyone's aware that you're not allowed to harm possums, and you're only allowed to take them, I believe it's about 150 meters from where they're caught and released again. So if you use a possum trap, like the cage on the far right, you have to then take the possum out and release it somewhere else. So with mechanical controls traps, some of them work better than others. I will talk about how to most effectively use traps. I've just had some rats appear in my garden over the last 2 weeks, and I've managed to get 3 last week, one yesterday and one today. And I've just put out some more traps for the rest of them. So we'll talk about how to use those and how to keep other wildlife safe from those, because we don't want to catch anything other than rats and mice in those. There are other physical controls which work on a microscopic level. There is a agricultural product which they normally spray on fruit to stop it being sunburnt. It's just sold as surround WP in large big bags. Other nurseries are selling it in smaller packages under different names, but it's essentially calcined kaolin. Kaolin is just a form of very fine clay. And what you do is you spray it on either new growth of citrus to stop either gall wasp from getting in or from leaf miner getting into the leaves. You'll also spray it onto your leaves, onto your fruit to stop it being sunburnt. If you've ever had peaches or nectarines or something like that, or plums, and you find there's a hollow dent at the top, you'll find it's usually in the northwest direction. That's because they're getting sunburnt. So when we get those sudden really hot days and your fruit starts getting overripened on one side and still green at the bottom, this stuff also prevents it, washes off. It's totally harmless, and it just acts as a barrier. When the pests encounter this weird surface, they're a bit sort of reluctant to lay their eggs there because it's not guaranteed normal. So they usually avoid it. It also works as a fungicide too. Okay, so let's put sort of a white grub burrow into their garlic. Since we've got new growth. I'm not familiar with any grubs in garlic. It'd probably be a beetle larvae of some sort. There is a lot of because they usually burrow underneath the soil and eat roots of plants just like the lawn beetles do. Now, there's ways to control them. I'll talk about some biological controls for those as well. Okay. So that's calcined kaolin. So when you mix it up and you spray it on the leaves, it looks like someone just sprayed white paint all over your plants. It will wash off, but it doesn't all come off. If you're going to spray, don't spray it on the flowers because it'll clog the flowers and stop them from actually working as flowers and being pollinated into fruit. But they're effective against gall wasp, codling moth, oriental fruit moth, leaf hoppers, powdery mildew, stink bugs, and thrips. So for people asking about harlequin bugs, depending on what your veggies are, if you spray those harlequin bugs or stink bugs, those orange and black bugs that are always mating and all over each other, they're very amorous bugs and they're very stinky. If you go near them, they actually have this quite, it's a natural defense. They put out this chemical which absolutely reeks. It makes you almost throw up from the smell. It's essentially to stop them eating birds. The reason why they're brightly colored is to say to birds, don't eat me, I'm toxic or I'm dangerous or I'm stinky and you're not going to like the taste of me. But if you spray the veggies that they're attacking because they're sap suckers, with the calcined kaolin, that is one of the things that will stop them. You could also, as I said, put those mesh bags over them. You could also put the netting over your whole garden bed. So just remember that anything that gets pollinated, even though tomatoes will get vibration pollinated if they just get shaken by the wind, even the plants that need pollination, think of pumpkins and cucumbers, whatever, once they're pollinated and the little fruit, essentially they are fruit, which is starting to form, you can just net the whole lot over and it'll be okay. So unlike leafy greens, you can cover your leafy greens at any point and your root crops at any point as well. But anything that flowers and fruits, you can wait till it's fertilized and then cover it all. Now, we talked about barriers. Now, what happens if the pests are coming to your garden even though you put barriers there? Well, you want to make it less encouraging for them. What we want to do is really ruin their day, disrupt their environment that attracts them, reduce their chances of establishing, reproducing, surviving, and then dispersing and moving to other parts of your garden. What we want to do is make it as inhospitable to the pests as possible. Now, a lot of these methods work with nature. A lot of them work around improving either the health of the plants or improving the soil health. And the two are related because remember that healthy plants can only grow out of healthy soil. It's very hard to have healthy plants growing out of unhealthy soils. So if we increase our soil health, if we remember that the soil is a living ecosystem, where every tablespoon of soil has between 20 to 50 billion soil organisms, human population is only 7 billion, just to put that into perspective. And the job of all those little organisms, they create a very complex living ecosystem called the soil food web. The purpose of the soil food web is to take anything that was once living that lands on the soil, break it down, recycle it, and turn it into nutrients that plants can use to start the cycle of life again. Because the energy that plants capture when they photosynthesize is energy stored in their chemical bonds, usually in the form of carbohydrates and sugars and things like that. And when other things eat those, the energy gets transferred. So essentially, plants are what we call producers. They capture the energy of sunlight and basically combine water, carbon dioxide, and the minerals in the soil to create new food to feed all other living things. So if we get a healthy soil, we can create healthy plants and a healthy ecosystem around that. And that can actually help control pests, just the same way that when you got a bad tummy and you can take some of those probiotics or culture type things that are yogurt-like to put more good bugs into your tummy to offset the bad bugs, nature works exactly the same way too. So what cultural controls can we implement in our gardens? Some of them really take no effort and no energy at all. We can just do simple things like change our schedule of irrigation and fertilization. If we don't fertilize too late in the season, or don't overwater, for example, or don't over-fertilize for that matter, we can improve soil health, because over-fertilizing is as bad as under-fertilizing. And if we fertilize at the wrong time of the year, we can actually push the growth out when the pests are at their peak. We don't want to do that. We want to push the growth out before the pests arrive. That way the growth can harden off. It can be a lot more pest resistant. Because a lot of people don't realize that plants have been on the planet for approximately 460 million years, trees for about 370 million. All plants and trees have the equivalent of an immune system where they can fight off pests and diseases, and they're capable of doing that. Because if they weren't, there wouldn't be any plants left on the planet now. The pests would have eaten them all. They would have all got extinct. There'd be no life left on this planet at all, because plants basically drive all of life, like I was saying earlier. So they actually can do that on their own. The thing is, if circumstances or situations are such that they're not really healthy and they can't protect themselves, we can help them out. We can also improve those conditions. One way of doing that is by avoiding the localized depletion of certain nutrients. So if we're growing tomatoes in the same garden bed year after year after year, they will deplete certain nutrients and leave more of others. And if we grow them continuously in the same spot, they will exhaust certain nutrients more than others. So what we do is we grow them in one garden bed, we move them next year to a different garden bed, and we move them around. That stops all the diseases that go around the roots of tomatoes, for example, all the pests that love tomatoes from gathering and just waiting for us to replant them each year, because eventually what will happen after a few years, there will be so much root diseases that we won't be able to plant tomatoes for 5 years in that garden bed anyway. And that's what happens when you get root knot nematode. If you pull up a tomato, it's got all these knotty roots, it's all mangled, and the plant's looking really sickly, you've got that problem. Now, the other thing we can do is pick pest-resistant varieties. This doesn't just apply to food plants, it can also apply to ornamentals or hedge-type plants. We've all seen people growing their lily-pillies everywhere as hedges. Well, you can get psyllid-resistant varieties of lily-pillies. Psyllids are little insects that cause these little dimples in the leaves. And if you get the psyllid-resistant varieties, you're less likely to get attacked by those, for example. So it's always a matter of right plant for the right place. That's the expression we have in the horticulture industry. If you put plants in a spot where they're not getting enough light or too much sun, or they're not getting enough water or too much water, they will become sick. So that's really important. The other one, which really just takes a little bit of effort on our behalf, is sanitation and hygiene. If we have fallen fruit that's diseased or rotting, infected leaves, leaves with pests on them, we pick them up, we put them in a plastic bag, we tie them up. We can solarize them if we want, where we put them in a black plastic bag and leave them in the sun for ages, or we can put them in the landfill bin. Also, we can remove hiding places where insects are likely to gather. Think of, piles of debris, rubbish, wood piles, bricks, whatever, because that's where your earwigs and your snails are going to hide, for example. And some weeds are important for the breeding cycle of certain insects. So if we know those, we can actually rip those out. We can also companion plant, where we can put plants that repel pests or attract beneficial insects, so the plants can do a lot better. Now, let's have a look at an example here. Citrus leaf miner. If anyone's got any citrus and you've seen those little silver tracks, it's a tiny little moth that lays its eggs in between the two layers of the leaf of the plant, and they tunnel through. Now, these little pests, they are at their peak in summer. So they're most prevalent at summertime and at autumn. When you get, now the thing is, once the leaves harden off, the pests can't lay eggs into them and they can't mine into them. So ideally what we do, we don't fertilize in early summer, because that will just push out lots of growth flushes in summer and they'll attack them all. If anyone remembers 2 years ago how everyone was getting citrus leaf miner, it's because our weather was going crazy and our summer, our seasons were out of whack, and we had lots of a very warm autumn, if I remember correctly, and it pushed out lots of new growth. And because the pests were abundant in autumn, they attacked everyone's citrus. They had a lot of issues with leaf miner. Ideally, what we do, we fertilize, start of spring, so late winter, start of spring. So the new growth comes out, hardens off, and then when the leaf miners are in their least, the population is at their lowest numbers, therefore we will have the least problem with the attack on the leaves. We can also spray with the calcine kaolin, which will stop them. If you also spray with horticultural oil like Eco oil or white oil or pest oil, but I prefer to use the Eco, which I'll talk about in a second, it creates a layer over the surface and it makes them a bit reluctant to lay their eggs in it. The other thing that does, if they've already laid their eggs in the leaf and they're tunneling, if you spray with Eco oil, it just suffocates them and will get rid of them. Now, if you're using horticultural oil, you can't use it on days when the temperatures are 30 degrees or over, because you get leaf burn. Now, horticultural oil, ones that you buy that are called pest oil or white oil, are normally just paraffin oil, which is not ideal for putting into your garden, because it's a water-soluble form. It's emulsified, so it can dissolve in water and it'll go into your soil. So you end up with lots of paraffin oil in your soil. Paraffin oil does not break down. I believe when I did some research for a project I was doing, that it lasts for about 8 years in your soil. So if you use it year after year after, you're going to get clogged up your soil with paraffin, which is not a really good thing. So Eco oil is essentially a natural soap with a vegetable oil. It's safe to use. It doesn't harm anything. You can spray it, then wash your veggies 30 seconds later and eat them, and it's totally harmless. It basically just smothers the insect. It just smothers them and suffocates them. So if you have to spray, you have to see the pest and spray it directly for it to work. But if the pest breathes air, it will be eliminated, and nothing can become immune from it, like the chemical controls, because it doesn't rely on a chemical function to work. It relies on a physical method, which is just excluding air from the pest. It will also smother eggs of pests as well, so that works just fine. Now, typically, as soon as your leaves on your citrus are 10 millimeters, basically a centimeter in size, spray them. That will protect them, because after they get over larger than that, they'll harden off and they'll protect themselves. Now, crop rotation is something that I just mentioned a second ago. Someone's just popped up the question, how do you encourage ladybugs in the garden? We're going to talk about that in a second, but essentially what you do is you plant plants that give them a permanent home over winter, and you plant plants that give them a nectar source when they eat all the pests. We'll talk about that in a moment. And that is all about companion planting, which is a fantastic topic. So with crop rotation, as I said, you don't plant the same plants in the same spot year after year. You grow them in one bed and you move them to the next spot the year after. So if we had a basic crop rotation system, so we had tomatoes, beans, and carrots, year one, tomatoes in bed one, year two, tomatoes in bed two, year three, tomatoes in bed three. And of course, the beans and carrots just move down one, really, really simple. I've already mentioned the what's it called? The benefit of crop rotation is it prevents localized soil nutrient depletion. Different veggies use different nutrients in different amounts. So when you move your veggies through, you'll even out the usage of nutrients. Plus, you're going to be adding more nutrients each season anyway. Basically, I might as well just mention it now. Start of spring and start of autumn, you need to replenish your soil in your garden. The way we replenish it is we add natural fertilizers such as manures to add the nutrients back into the soil. And then we also add compost to rebuild the soil structure. When the soil gets compacted and it's no longer aerated, it just fluffs the soil back up. So that will also feed all those little organisms in the soil. It'll let oxygen travel down to the plant roots when water moves down and pulls air behind it. And it'll make it easier for plants to push their roots through. So we add twice as much compost as we add manure. So if we can add 1 bucket of cow manure, we add 2 buckets of compost. That's how we do it. I've got lots of instructions on my website about refeeding the garden and how much you add and quantities. If you're using a bagged product like, I should say a processed bagged product like dynamic lifter pellets or Grow Better organic fertilizer, you follow the instructions of the application, but you would normally put, say, a bag of compost at least per 2 square meters approximately. So when we replenish the soil and move the veggies from one bed to another, we don't cause any localized depletion of nutrients. The other thing is, if we grow the same plant, like I said, in the same spot, they'll all gather there, all the pests and all the diseases, so we prevent them from building up their populations. And like I mentioned way back about cultural controls, one of the main techniques that we use is soil health. The important thing is when we add the nutrients back in and we add the organic matter back in to restore the soil structure, we keep the soil healthy, and that keeps everything healthy. Now, a lot of people are familiar with the old traditional crop rotation system where you group veggies by their families. So you've got the cucurbit family, which is cantaloupes, cucumbers, pumpkins, squash, watermelon, for example. You'll have all your brassicas in one family, and you have all your solanums, or basically nightshade family, tomato family, where you have, and they add okra in there, but it's eggplant, potatoes, peppers, tomatoes. And the whole idea is that you put one group and then you rotate to the other group, and no one remembers this. No one can be bothered with this. This is an absolutely atrocious method, and that's why nobody uses it. So a while back, there was a gentleman by the name of John Jevons in his book, How to Grow More Vegetables, who came up with a really, really easy system that you can remember off the top of your head. He just created 3 categories of veggies: heavy feeders, heavy givers, and light feeders. Now, the heavy feeders, the easy way to remember it, literally every vegetable except the other 2 categories. So just think about almost every vegetable that you know, that's going to be a heavy feeder, except for these 2 categories. The heavy givers, they're all your bean pea family, all the legumes. They have little nodules in their roots that house a little bacteria called the rhizobium bacteria. They can grab nitrogen from the air and make its own fertilizer for the plant. The plant photosynthesizes and gives it sugars, and they look after each other and they feed each other. So any So all plants are heavy feeders except the heavy givers, which are all your legume family, and the light feeders, which are all your root crops, anything that produces a crop below the ground. Really easy to remember. So how do we rotate? We can put heavy feeders in a bed. The next year we put the heavy givers. The next year we put the light feeders. And then year 4, we put the heavy feeders back in, and we just keep it rotating. Okay, we have some more questions. Okay. Yes, there's a lot on my website on deepgreenpermaculture.com, lots of articles on this stuff. So I'll try to give you as much of an overview as possible, and we'll try to cover as much as we can. Now, let's keep it rolling. So, like I mentioned, the heavy feeders, literally every veggie that you know. The light feeders are all the root crops like carrot, garlic, leek, mustard, onions, parsnips, etc. But also Swiss chard, which is also sold as perpetual lettuce, which is also sold as silver beet. There's slight variations, but it's pretty much the same plant. And that's a leaf crop. And the heavy feeders, sorry, the heavy givers aren't just beans and peas. If you have orchards, farmers grow clover, believe it or not, which is also a legume underneath. Peanuts are also legumes as well. They're rather funny because they bury their little flowers underneath and they form these little pods with peas in them. And you can buy peanuts and you can grow them here. They just take a little bit of care and work. But if you want something interesting to grow, you can always try peanuts too, but they're not really ideal for crop rotation. The other thing you can do to improve your soil, and this also applies, I've had people who tell me, I'm a vegan gardener and I don't want to use animal manure. What can I use? Well, you can use green manures. A green manure is a mix of a grass, things like, imagine things like oats and buckwheat and things like that, millet. So it's a mixture of a grass and a legume. The grass provides essentially organic matter, carbon-rich material. The legumes will provide the nitrogen. And what you do is you sow a whole garden bed with these and let it all grow. Just before it flowers, you could slash it all to the ground and dig it in. If you're a no-dig gardener, you can just cover it with mulch. And that's what a green manure is. So you can use that to improve your garden. Simple green manure for budget green manure, the no-brain way of doing it. In cool season, start of spring, get a big bag of broad beans, not from a nursery, but from a supermarket that sells organic broad beans. You can buy a couple of hundred for about $3. Push them in with your thumb, water it, walk away. You'll have a huge crop of broad beans. When all that nitrogen is built up in their roots, when they're flowering, it's about to go into create all that protein-rich bean crop. You just slash them to the ground, you lay them down and you cover up with mulch and let it rot down. And that loosens up the soil, adds heaps of nutrients to the soil, and it all literally comes out of thin air essentially, which is pretty amazing because all the nitrogen's from the air. And think of carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, where's all the green mass come from? Well, a lot of it is 97% of that mass is going to be from carbon dioxide from the air and water, H2O, hydrogen, oxygen. That's how you get your carbohydrates. So you're literally creating organic material out of thin air with broad beans. So really simple solution. Now, I did go through the spring autumn way of feeding the garden. So just remember, compost only contains some nutrients, but it restores soil structure. In other words, keeping the soil light and fluffy. Fertilizers replace the nutrients. Now, remember all those living billions of little soil organisms that are doing all this hard work, recycling all this material back into plant food? Well, you want to keep them alive by keeping them cool and keeping them warm. So keeping them cool and keeping them moist. You don't want them to get too warm. So if you have the sun beating down on bare soil, it's going to kill them. It'll dry them out and the UV will sterilize the soil because we know UV is a way of sterilizing for bacteria, sterilizing things to get rid of bacteria. Essentially, the sun's rays do that. So if you keep the mulch over it, it'll keep it moist underneath. It'll keep them cool in summer and they will proliferate and it will will basically move the soil in the direction of becoming much, much more healthier. We've got another question. How do you keep ants away from your veggie garden beds? Well, very simple thing. What you do is you create an ant trap. You can make a trap with a little takeaway container, with some cotton wool and some homebrew borax ant bait. Borax is essentially something they use as a laundry product for washing. It's what the Native American Indians used to use in the creeks to wash their clothes, because they used to find the natural mineral from there. So you can buy a container of borax and you can buy some caster sugar, and I've got the recipe on my website. If anyone goes to deepgreenpermaculture.com, there's a categories section, and if you look up pests and diseases, there's how to make an ant trap, and it works both indoors and outdoors, and it works really well. The ants, they are generally beneficial, but when their numbers get too big, what they do is they farm scale and aphids. What they do, they keep the little critters in their nests in winter and look after them. And then when you get all the new growth on your plants and trees, they will go take them out and stick them on the new growth so they can actually suck the sap. The aphids and scale suck the sap, and literally most of it comes out the other side unaltered. They just take some of the protein out of it. And the ants harvest that honeydew and they farm them, so they control them. They put actually a pheromone out which pacifies them. If any of them grow wings, they go and clip their wings off, believe it or not. And if any other beneficial insects go to attack them, they protect them, they defend them. So when you glue band your trees or your plants, the ants can't go up there to protect them, but also if you keep the ant numbers down, you won't get ants doing that so much, and the beneficial insects will clean them up much, much quicker. So that's really important. Now, that is all about helping the plants do their job. But like I mentioned earlier, make sure you get the right plant for the right spot. The way we do that with our veggies, anything that flowers and fruits, and think what flowers that we eat, broccoli and cauliflower, the florets, they're flowers. Anything that fruits, anything that produces like a fruiting body, think something like a cucumber, a tomato, you name it, any kind of veggie. That's not a leaf vegetable or a stem veggie. That is essentially something that flowers and fruits. So anything that flowers and fruits needs 6 to 8 hours of full sun minimum while it's growing. So make sure those veggies go in those spots in your garden. If you have anything that gets a bit less sun, like dappled sun, for example, or maybe 4 to 6 hours, that's where you put all your root crops. So root crops go in those spots. So if you have 4 to 6, about 6 hours or less, up to about 4, put your root crops there. If you have a spot that gets about 4 hours of sun or really dappled sun, that's where all your leaf crops grow. Think of silver beet, lettuce, spinach, and so forth. Because if you put the plants that need a lot of sun in the shady spots, they'll get weakened and the pests attack them. The pest's job is not to actually spot you and make your gardening unpleasant. Their job is to pick off the stragglers that are barely surviving so something better can grow. That's how natural selection works. So if a plant's somewhere where it's not doing well, it's not supposed to be there, their job is to go and kill it off, to finish it off. So they basically walk through the battlefield, killing off the dying. That's what their job is. That's what diseases do. That's what pests do. So if you put the right plant in the right place, it will survive. And if you help it doing using all these techniques that we tell you about, you can make the plants even stronger and healthier and far more resilient and vigorous. So we essentially give the plant what it needs, and we create more of what it likes. And that works in the plant's favor. Now, someone mentioned about plants and ladybirds and so forth. Now we're going to deep dive into that topic. Companion planting, one of the systems of integrated pest management, cultural controls, and one of the big ones in that category are companion planting. Now with companion planting, it's really a matter of planting 2 or more plants together where some benefit is derived to support the plant. And the benefits include like control of pests. They can either repel pests or attract beneficial insects to get rid of the pests. They can increase the health and vigor of the plant, making it a lot stronger. They can make it more resistant to disease. They can also create a habitat for beneficial insects, which will then attack your pests and reduce their population. Also, companion plants can sometimes drive the yields up and help your plants become more fruitful, which is pretty amazing. So let's look at some quick ways that companion plants work. One of the ways that they work is to repel pests and suppress diseases. And they can do that from chemicals that are either exuded from their roots, their leaves, or their flowers. And we've got an example of each. Horseradish, for example, if you were to grow that in at one corner of your potato patch, it puts out chemicals from its roots, which protect potatoes from potato root diseases. Similarly, carrots and onions, if you put carrots and onions together, carrots exude substances from their roots which protect onions from root diseases, and onions exude things from their roots which protect carrots from root diseases. They look after each other from exudates from their roots. Tansy is a daisy family plant, but it doesn't have petals on it. Those little yellow butterflies do attract beneficial insects, but what we grow them for between our fruit trees is the foliage, which is traditionally used in England as a traditional old England was used as a fly repellent for people who didn't have glass windows. Remember, they had shutters. Wealthy people had glass. And so they would use it as a string herb to throw across benches to keep flies away. And these days, people grow it between their fruit trees to repel pests. So it works really well from an exudate from its leaves. You can also have plants that exude a substance from their flowers. For people who don't recognize it, a clove pink, you can also get clove whites. They have an interesting fragrance, which has got a bit of a floral clove-like scent. They're also known as dianthus or carnations. And they will only repel pests while they're in flower, obviously. They don't repel beneficial insects. Butterflies will go on the flowers and absolutely love them. It's just that the pests don't like those smells. Because remember, the good bugs eat nectar, bad bugs eat your plants. Marigolds are interesting. Those French marigolds that we got there, they're just annual plants. You can get the tall ones or the short ones. They exude a substance from their roots, which if you plant them really, really densely, and that's the important thing, it'll get rid of nematode disease. Basically, the little nematode organism is a microscopic worm that attacks plant roots. If you've got nematodes, it essentially works as a biofumigant, more or less. The normal means of dealing with nematodes is to stem the soil and use chemical fumigants. So that does that job really well. The next plant is a Santolina. That has, again, little yellow button-like flowers which attract beneficial insects, but the leaves have it's quite a pleasant smell, actually, but it's called a cotton lavender, but it's actually not a lavender, or it's not related to lavender in any way, and the leaves are pest repellent. Similarly, any of the what people call the lemon or citronella geraniums, they're not geraniums, they're pelargoniums, which are cousins to geraniums, but most people use the term interchangeably. They have tiny little hairs on their leaves with little oil glands. If you brush against it, they release the oils and they will repel the pests. So they will all work fine. Some people ask about mosquito repellent plants. Well, if you run your arms through those plants or rub the leaves on your arms, they will repel mozzies. I find when I've done that, I usually get bitten at the sort of the top of my t-shirt sleeve line where I didn't quite reach up high enough. That's the only place I do get bitten. There are also plants like Leptospermum mozzie. Is it mozzie blocker, mozzie buster? It's a Leptospermum liversigii. It's an Australian native. It'll keep mozzies away for about 3 square meters in area. And I think it's Leptospermum mozzie blocker is its name. So you can grow other plants. There's also perennial edgeratums, which I'll show you guys in a second. Now we've got another question there. Okay, no, we don't. Okay. Now, another thing that we can do with pests is you can corral them all into one area so they don't go damage your plants that you're wanting to protect. What you can do is put essentially what are decoy plants out there, where the decoy plant is a sacrificial plant. It's preferred by the pests above everything else. So the pests will head for it, and it'll save your good plants getting damaged. The good thing about the decoy sacrificial plants, what we call trap crops, is that all trap crops have the ability to sustain pest damage and either bounce back or set seed and come back next year when they're annuals, such as nettles. So with horseradish, I use that as a trap crop near my rhubarb, because snails absolutely love rhubarb leaves, and they will make your rhubarb look absolutely atrocious. But what they will also do is they love attack your horseradish, and they love horseradish even more. Horseradish dies down in winter though, but during the warmer seasons, it will take all the snails. It'll take damage from all the snails, and they'll skeletonize it. But you'll save all your other plants, and my rhubarb will be pristine. So if you're going to put your snail pellets, you can just put them around the horseradish. If you use the organic ones or the sustainable, the pet safe ones, and they will all go there, and that way you can actually just target them in one spot. Nasturtiums similarly will attract aphids, as will nettles. So with nasturtiums, pretty hard to kill, and they're also quite nice because they're colourful, and the flowers are also edible, as are nettles themselves. They're considered a superfood. They also make a really good tea as well. And they're also a great compost starter, by the way. If you put nettles or comfrey or yarrow leaves into your compost, it works as a compost starter. There are other companion plants, by which we'll talk about in a second. But with these, they attract all the aphids, and the aphids can't kill the plants. So nasturtiums and nettles will draw all the aphids. So you can also put nasturtiums under your apple trees, because they exude mustard oil, which repels codling moths. So they have multiple purposes. But if you put nettles down, and the way to get nettles is just to use cabinet, they all pop up. What you do is just dig them all out, put them all into one little patch away from from your main garden, just to one corner or one side, and let them re-establish. What will happen? All the aphids will lay their eggs there. Then the ladybirds will lay their eggs there. So when the little baby ladybird larvae hatch, they will eat all your aphids. So that works really, really good. Now, there's another amazing companion plant, which is a trap crop, but it's called a dead-end trap crop. Thank you, whoever it was that put the Mozzie blocker plant link up. Now, trap crops, as we mentioned, will draw all the pests to the crop. Now, a dead-end trap crop goes one step further. This plant is called land cress. It could also be found under the name of upland cress or American upland cress. They're actually two different plants. Land cress is Barbaria vulgaris, and upland cress or American upland cress is Barbaria vernia. Now, these plants are a salad cress. They're a biennial. They're from the brassica family. They're very good for you. They're tasty, and you put them in your salad. The great thing about these is that you can plant them amongst your brassica crops or wherever else in your garden, and they put out a chemical from their leaves that say to the butterflies and moths, lay your eggs here. So they do. Now, certain butterflies and moths, like the diamondback moth and a few other butterflies and moths, when their little caterpillar eats the leaves, it will also react badly to this compound called saponin in the leaf, which is essentially a natural soap, which you can't taste because the concentration is so small in there, but it will kill the caterpillars. So that works really well in that respect. So it's a dead-end trap crop because it not only draws them, but kills them. But it won't kill the cabbage white butterflies, which everyone gets. It doesn't do that, but it will probably attract them to it. So you'll have localized damage. You can just pick them off there anyway, and they won't be on your tomatoes instead. One of the other ways we can use companion plants is to confuse bugs that look for the outline. So if you've got a nice little row of lettuce and they recognize lettuce by the shape, then what you do is you mix up, you plant your companion plants, all different aromatic herbs, different culinary herbs, and all bits and pieces, even ornamentals around them. They'll get confused. They won't find them. Sometimes you won't find them either. That's the only problem. I've done it with garlic, and I've lost my garlic, and then I come back the next year and go, why is this big bunch of garlic all coming up all close together? And I realize it's stuff that I've forgotten, but so I couldn't find it. But if you put other plants around, mix up your plants, it creates a confusing physical outline so they can't find them so easily. But a lot of more pests actually trace their their food by scent. What they do is they sit down and let the wind blow the scent to them. Imagine you put all your cabbages and broccolis and cauliflowers in for the cool season. What they'll do is sit down, wind, and wait for the scent to waft past them. So typically in Victoria, we get southwesterly winds in winter, and we get northerly winds in summer. So if you put, so the way we confuse them, we can just put any aromatic plants. They can be all your culinary herbs that you would normally grow, or some other aromatic plants, which I'm going to discuss in a second. You plant them upwind. So the wind will blow through these plants and blow their scent over your veggie garden. And then the scent of the veggie garden will waft down to the insect. The insect's going to be confused because it's not going to smell right, and it will probably go to your neighbors where it smells more normal. So that's how, and sometimes you see community gardens, and they will have, like, where they have a big cyclone fence on one side and the wind blows through, they might have wormwood, which is a silver plant on the far left-hand side, growing, because what that will do, it's not only pest repellent, but the scent will confuse all the insects and it will mask the scent, as will lavender, as will rosemary, and a lot of your culinary herbs, because they all have aromatic oils in them. Now, if you grow yarrow next to them, it increases the aromatic oil of your culinary herbs. So not only will have more flavor, they'll also scent mask a bit better. Just be aware that all lavenders have camphor in them, except 2 varieties, which are the edible ones. So when we're using them as pest repellents, we just use the general varieties. And if you use some lavender or dried wormwood, or both preferably, put them in a little organza or a mesh bag and put them in your kitchen pantry to keep little bugs out, like weevils. You can also put them in your clothes drawers or your linen drawer to stop the little moths getting in there as well. Now, there's only 2 varieties of lavender which are edible, which you would not use for scent masking, really, because they don't have much camphor. They're the ones that you use for lavender tea. That's lavender Munstead, M-U-N-S-T-E-A-D, Munstead, and lavender Hidcote, H-I-D-C-O-T-E. So they're Munstead and Hidcote lavenders, they only grow about 45, 50 centimeters, and they're more culinary ones. So don't use those for pest repellents. Use those as your culinary herbs, but the rest of the lavenders you can use as pest repellents. Now, this little plant with the purple flowers is also known as the floss flower. That's a perennial ageratum. It attracts bees. It's a pretty looking little plant. You just clip back and it just lives year after year. But what it does is it also exudes a certain compound from its leaves, which repels mosquitoes. So that is a mozzie repeller. Now, let's move on to biological controls. Let me have a drink for a second because we're really ripping through these. You can attract lots of beneficial insects, or you can buy them and introduce them into your garden to control pests. And the insects, the beneficials, include things like ladybirds, lacewings, hoverflies, predatory mites, parasitic wasps, nematodes, which are these microscopic little worms that you can't actually see with the naked eye. And you can also buy certain bacteria as well. Here we've got a predatory mite, we have nematodes, and we have a little hoverfly there. And there we have ladybirds, more hoverflies, a lacewing, a parasitic wasp, and a praying mantis. And one of the participants asked earlier, how do we attract ladybirds to our gardens? Well, the thing is, the same way that we attract all the other beneficials, what we got to realize that just like us, they have the same basic needs. They need a permanent home, somewhere where they can overwinter in, where they're protected and it's not going to be torn down or ripped out, and an alternative food source for when they run out of bugs to eat. And the alternative food source is nectar. Now, if we understand the form of these beneficial insects, they don't have the big windy proboscises to get into flowers like a butterfly does, and they don't have long tongues like a bee does to get into long, deep flowers either. They have little short mouth parts, so they only can get into very shallow flowers, such as things from the daisy family or plants from the parsley, carrot, dill family with very, very shallow flowers. Now, if you look at a daisy, that's it's about several hundred little shallow flowers all all gathered together. It's a composite flower. They used to be called the Compositae family. Now they call them the Asteraceae family, which just means star in Latin. And the old name for the parsley, carrot, dill family was the Umbelliferae family, because they have those little umbels, those little umbrella-like flowers. They just call them Apiaceae family now. You can get Asteraceae and Apiaceae family in both exotic and native. So just realize you're not restricted to exotic plants. Here I've got a feverfew daisy, which also has a pest repellent leaf. It's related to pyrethrum daisy, which is where they get the pyrethrum from to make pyrethrum spray to kill insects. And here we've got parsley, which is obviously an exotic. You can grow any of the Australian native Apiaceae family plants or any of the Australian native daisies as well, and they will serve an equal purpose depending on what type of garden you want to grow. Just make sure you grow the right plants in the right place. A lot of Australian daisies don't like too much waterlogging. So if you've got a veggie patch and you want to put the plants in there, use something like calendula, which are the big bright orange flowers, which you can actually eat as well. They will grow in the same conditions as veggies. Some of the Australian native daisies, I found there's one called what we call the tall daisy, which is a very uncreative name for Brachyscoma diversifolia. It's a big white flowering daisy, small plant, very big flowers. It's related to the little purple daisies, the cut leaf daisy, and that seems to attract a lot of beneficials and a lot of bees, I found, but it gets really upset if you put it in a spot with too much moisture. So I find that it prefers something a little bit more well-draining than your veggie patch potentially. So just be aware when you're going to use natives that you have to match them to their water requirements. A lot of them will usually die from overwatering. That's the risk there. Can we have one more question? Okay, yeah, we will at 8:30, we will go into questions, guys. So just hang on. Now, so what we want to do is we want to have lots of plants that work like little shallow nectar cups to feed our beneficials. And we want perennial plants that are going to be there all year round for the insects to hide in. We don't want any plants that lose their leaves as their home, because obviously they're not going to have any leaves they can't hide in them over winter. It doesn't know what the plants are, as long as they have lots of leaves for them to hide in and they have the shallow flowers. There's other plants with shallow flowers. A really good one is sweet alyssum, which is a classical cottage garden flower. It's actually from the brassica or mustard family, believe it or not. Some people say you can actually eat the leaves and it tastes mustard-like. It's an annual, so it'll go to seed, it dies, it pops back up. The one that works the best from my experience is not the pink or the purple one, but the white one. And you buy it once, just like you buy calendula once, it'll keep on coming back. You just dig it up and move it to where you want. Yarrow looks like a carrot, but it's not related to carrot. It's actually daisy family. That's another one I mentioned. It was a compost starter. It attracts beneficial insects, but they will also increase the aromatic oils in your herbs. Now, some people will fuss over yarrow, saying that it spreads too much. It runs along edges of gardens, but it forms a thin, narrow strip, and it's only very shallow rooted, about 10 centimeters, I would say, and it lifts clean out if you just lift it. There's no effort, and it doesn't grow from root fragments. But if you don't like that one, you can get the colored ones, which stay in a clump, and they get a little bit taller, and all you do is you cut them back down after they've finished flowering. In summer, cut them fairly low, not too low though, and they come back up. But if you're looking to attract beneficials, it's not just insects that are beneficials. Birds are also beneficial and can attract, and you can attract birds as beneficials, which will eat a lot of your pests. Now, there's a lot of there's exotic plants that will still attract native birds, but it's really easy if you've just got native trees and native shrubs to attract native birds. Different flower depths will attract birds with different beaks. And so if you have a mix of deep and shallow flowers, you'll attract a bigger range of native birds. I find that the red wattle birds, for example, they're classic nectar feeders. They come and they'll also pick pests off my, like aphids off the citrus tree at home here. So you can attract a lot of noisy miners will also eat insects as well. So also include a range of bird attracting. So when you go to a nursery, you look at the tag, if it says bird attracting, then you know it's a nectar source for birds, and the birds will also control your pests. That works really good. Now, this is a big list. I'm not going to go through them all. I just want to explain the basic principles. You can get different ladybirds eat different pests. This is what this is all showing. This is giving you all the names, because you can actually buy all of these insects as well from, I'll show you the suppliers, but you don't need to do that. You just create those environments that I said that are conducive to them surviving. You know, perennial plants that are green all year round, and nectar source plants. So nectary and insectary plants. Nectary plants give them nectar, insectary plants are a home for insects, and you'll encourage them. Lacewings will control a range of pests. And so some ladybirds only control certain things. We've also got predatory mites. Predatory mites are a way to encourage those little guys. Some of them control spider mites. In other words, they eat other mites. Other ones will control thrips, whitefly, and other mites as well, and other insects. What you simply do is you have very healthy soil and you have a good thick layer of mulch. The predatory mites live in the mulch and they climb up the plant stems and attack the other little pests. So that's how you encourage mites. Parasitic wasps also attack a range of different insects depending on the type of wasp. Again, the way parasitic wasps work is they lay their eggs into the pest that they're attacking. The little the wasp grubs actually hatch inside the insect and eat it from the inside and then eat their way out, which is a bit gross, but they're very effective at doing that. And some of the wasps are like smaller than an ant. Some of them can be really big and attack really large caterpillars. Again, all you need to do to attract parasitic wasps, because they're nectar feeders, is have nectar-rich, shallow flowers for them to feed on, and they will come by themselves. Some of the big ones will attack things like codling moth caterpillars, which is what we've got a picture of there. There's also nematodes. They're microscopic worms you can buy as it looks like a powder. You put it in a watering can, you can water it over what you're going to protect. There's certain ones that'll eat the lawn grub beetles, the big C-shaped thick grubs that eat patches of your lawn. So once you put the nematodes in there, the nematodes will protect that lawn forever on. They will hunt. Some of them will hunt the beetle larvae and go inside them and release bacteria which kill them. Other ones will sit there and ambush them. So they act in different ways. You can also get nematodes to control the little fungus gnats in your indoor plants, the little flies that fly around. You also get bacteria to control them too. The bacteria that you get for controlling caterpillars is called Bacillus thuringiensis. The one that you use for fungus gnats is Bacillus thuringiensis, or they're both called BT, but they're different varieties. So the one that's nature's by caterpillar killer, also known as dipel, is one that you spray on the leaves. When the caterpillars eat them, in about 3 days, they stop feeding and they die. The one that you put in your indoor plants is a different variety. So this one's subspecies Kostaki, which is the one for caterpillars. The one for indoor plants for fungus gnats is the variety or subspecies Israeliensis. So there's 2 different varieties. You can also get a bacteria called milky spore, which is a commercial treatment for lawn beetles as well, and it will kill them. But the other thing that works really good for killing those lawn beetles is magpies. They're really, really good at digging them out and pulling out. They leave little divots and pull out little divots and leave little holes in your lawn. You just push them down, water it back down, no big deal. But the way you attract magpies is you have lots of large trees. If you have lots of large native trees, that's a home for the magpies. The magpies will come down and they'll clean your lawn for free, and you don't have to buy anything. So that works really well. Here's 2 companies that will sorry, what was I saying? These are some companies that sell both nematodes or beneficial bacteria or the pests. So you can go onto their websites. They will provide you with any of these products if you need them. They don't. They basically the living ones like the ladybirds, lacewings, and things like that. they ship them really quickly in a sort of like foam container. You have to apply them pretty quickly because they're living things. Now we'll just quickly go through chemical controls and then we'll wrap it up and go into questions. So now chemical controls, as I said, are our last resort in IPM. So we use the most selective ones, in other words, ones that don't kill everything, but only specific insects if we can, and the least toxic ones to get the job done. And that way, if they don't work, we can escalate and move to something a bit stronger. When we use them also, we use them responsibly. We spot spray rather than just spray like crazy, and we spray in a way that minimizes wind drift and runoff, and we avoid spraying before it rains, or we don't run irrigation systems after we've sprayed because we don't want the water to carry the pesticide off site, and we spray late in the evening. The reason why is because all the bees have gone home. Now, these are just some terms for how different. This is just saying that certain chemicals are selective and other ones are not selective. They just kill everything. Some are systemic. They go into the sap of the plant and make every part of it toxic. Other ones work by contact. We have to directly spray the insect. Now, typically, most of your problems can be solved with 2 products. The third one's optional and very expensive. So Eco Oil can kill any pest that you can see. It just suffocates them. They can't become immune to it. You only need about 5 ml per litre for things like aphids, and for bigger things and tougher things like scale, you need about 10 ml per litre. You normally spray after about 3 to 5 days, and it usually cleans up the problem. It works extremely well. A half-litre container will last a very long time. Pyrethrum is fairly safe, but it's not organic because it contains an extra little compound called a potentiator, which makes it a bit makes it harder for the pests to get rid of it out of their system. But it's fairly safe. You just use it in the evening. It has a life of 24 hours. UV from the sun deactivates it. So you spray it in the evening when the caterpillars are all feeding on your plants anyway. By the time the morning, probably might have rained as well. It's not going to be anywhere near where the bees are. It will be okay. The other product is neem. Neem is an oil from the Indian neem tree. It works both as an anti-feeder. When pests eat it, they stop eating and they eventually die. The other thing that it does is it breaks their life cycle, and they go from egg to, through to like a juvenile to an adult. And it breaks their it breaks their life cycle, stops them getting to the next stage of life, and therefore stops them breeding. And we have to spit up again. You can also, I won't get into the detail here, but you can also use specific organic or low impact chemical controls for controlling fungi in fruit trees or your veggies, and for diseases. And you can also use safe controls for your control of weeds. The one on the left, Slasher, it's essentially geranium oil, and it strips the wax off the plants and they desiccate. Don't use some of the vinegar-based ones because they contain salt, really bad for your soil. So this is just a summary of IPM. I won't go into the details. So just to summarize, what we're doing here is we're understanding the biology of the pest, essentially its life cycle, the conditions that it really requires to thrive. We identify the pest. We try to exclude the pest from the area. We make it inhospitable for it as possible. We remove all the things that are going to help it out. We add all the things that are going to make it difficult for it. And we use the controls in a combination for the most effective solution. Now, these are just some of the, so it'll take about 5 seconds. So we've just different pests here. I've already talked about a lot of these. They're aphids on roses. They're ladybirds that kill them. If you see anything, it looks like the little bug on the far right-hand side. They can be grey and black and all range of colours, and they're sort of spiky. That's a ladybird larvae. It's a baby ladybird, and that eats, it's big, it's about twice the size of a ladybird, so don't ask me how that works. And it will eat lots of aphids, so don't hurt those at all. You can also put tansy and pennyroyal to repel ants as well. garlic and chives under citrus trees will repel aphids under the leaves because of the garlicky and in the odor. The pests, there's aphids that attack onions and garlic. They're onion garlic aphids. They're a different pest altogether. And we've already talked about attracting beneficial wasps. These are examples of beneficial wasps. This one's tiny, it's a bit smaller than an ant. This one's a little metallic blue one. These were in my garden. If you see an aphid that looks a bit bigger than all the other aphids, and it's a real weird tan color, it's moving around a bit strange, it's parasitized. The wasps have actually stung it, and it's eventually going to explode open, and wasps are going to come out of it, so leave those. If you see empty husks of those, it's a similar thing. I've got a lot of other controls here, which I probably won't go into. So you can actually use echo oil, white oil on aphids. I also talked about glue banding the trees. You can also get glue band where it's a cardboard and the paste, and you do it yourself. That's the little DIY ant trap that I've got instructions for on my website to stop the ants from protecting the aphids. Cabbage white butterflies. I'm not sure whether the eggshells or the fake white butterflies actually work too well, but you can bring the parasitic wasps to get rid of them. Also use things like the landcress, like we spoke about. Dipel works. There's also success, which is meant to be supposedly organic. It's not organic, it's quite harmful. Don't use success unless you really have to. It's really toxic to bees. Citrus leaf miner we've already talked about. That's the wasp there. Sorry, that's the little moth. I'm rushing a bit too much here. If you see the tracks and you don't want to cut the leaves off, you just spray with echo oil or white oil or whichever you want. It'll smother them, it gets rid of them. Citrus gall wasp. What you can do with these guys, we've already talked about spraying with that kaolin spray, which stops them. You also hang up the the little sticky traps, and you twist the top to let the scent out. But they remember the hatch in spring. So before the weather warms up, you slice one side of the gall out with the secateurs. It will dry out from the cold, dry winds, especially in winter, and it'll get rid of them and it'll save the branch. If it's got little holes in the side, it means they've already escaped. It's too late. There's no point doing that. Earwigs, someone asked about those earlier. The soy sauce trap and earwig trap, if you do them right, they will work. What you've got to do is put them in a protected spot where they're likely to go towards them. You can also reduce the numbers by clearing a lot of clutter around the garden. If you put the traps like in a corner of the garden bit, for example, because remember, they're going to be scurrying before the daylight comes for shelter. They will go in those, and that will actually work. Hair cherry slugs, if you've ever had any of these guys, just use any dry powder will work. Ashes, talcum powder, flour from your kitchen. I've used dolomite lime. That will work as well. You can make certain glue sprays, which I've got instructions for, but pyrethrum just works fine, or you can just squish the leaves. They create that sort of damage. Scale, again, you can, most people won't scrape them off with the toothbrush. You control the ants, you spray with echo oil, that will suffocate them. The wasps will get into them and finish them off. Snails and slugs, lots of different ways. We've already talked about sacrificial plants such as horseradish. If you're going to make rings of either things like crushed eggshell, coffee grounds, or sawdust, make sure they're thick donut-shaped rings so they have trouble getting through them, not sprinkling just around because that won't work. You can also take a plastic soft drink bottle, cut the bottom off, take the lid off and put it over a seedling that will protect it. Another way is to make a poisonous drink for them. What you can do is brew up a strong espresso, add it, mix it with 10 parts water and spray it over the plants and the soil. They crawl over it, poisons them, they die. Simple way to get rid of them. Also to get rid of earwigs as well, I find, is you just put some either an upside down terracotta pot or a board. They will gather underneath and they will vanish. You can also keep them out of your garden with wormwood, mint, tansy, or lemon balm as a mulch. Just mulch it all up and sprinkle it. They hate the smell. Don't use salt to melt them. If your kids love doing that, I've got a little formula, which is 1 part cloudy ammonia, 4 parts water, dash of liquid soap. I discovered that as a kid myself. You spray it, they melt instantly. Kids get excited by it. They turn into green mush. The nitrogen in the ammonia goes back into the soil, adds to the nitrogen cycle. so it keeps things healthy. If you're going to use snail pellets, don't use the blue ones or the green ones. They're very, very toxic. They're really nasty. Use the brown ones. They're called multi-guard. They're not organic certified, but they're safe, child safe, native wildlife safe. It's just chelated iron. You can also get elemental iron ones, a bit more expensive, organic certified. Spider mites just keep your plants well watered and they don't attack. And you can use wettable sulfur. If your tomatoes are also losing all their leaves from the bottom, it moves up. That's another russet mite. It's another mite. So you just use wettable sulfur, spray, it gets rid of the mites as well. Whitefly, simple way to stop them is you can hose them off and it usually kills a lot of them. You can vacuum clean them off with a hand vac. I've actually done that. And you can spray them with pyrethrum or eco oil. Or neem spray, that will all work. Queensland fruit flies a bit complicated to explain in short time, but with Queensland fruit fly, you have to get your traps out, the pheromone lures. As soon as you detect the males, then you put the bait traps out, which is sugar protein combination. You put them on the board, a piece of wood, or on the trunk of a tree. They'll eat it, they will die. You also hang up your traps, which are a sugar protein blend. They'll drain them, you refill those and you keep it going. You use the nets over anything that fruits or flowers, think of berries, any kind of fruit, literally they take everything. So you can either net whole trees, whole garden beds, or just the fruit with the bags, that will all work. And if you've got possums, you can also use the nets. It'll keep your cockies out too. The only thing it won't stop is rats and mice. You can also use Lapsang Souchong tea, which is an Indonesian tea. They absolutely hate the stuff. CSIRO has proven that stuff works. And you can use electric fences, spikes, and animals to deter them. I won't go to peach leaf curl. These are just diseases. And all I really wanted to say, if you're using chemical controls, if you have been using them, you've probably killed a lot of your beneficial insects. So just be patient, give it a few months for their population to recover. And then they will come back and they will mop everything up. And that's a little hoverfly on an osteosperma. If you want to know which plants are really good to attract beneficial insects, go to a garden nursery or a garden or your own garden and look where the hoverflies are. Where they go is where all the other beneficials will go. They're plants you should put in your garden. So I'll stop sharing this and let's go and do questions. Wow, we've got quite a few here. Okay. No. Okay. What about butcher boys, friend or foe? Butcher boys, wood lice, they're actually crustaceans. They're members of the lobster family, believe it or not. Those little guys, pill bugs, which I used to remember prodding and watching roll up as a little kid. Those little guys, they like moist, damp environments. Their main thing that they eat is rotting vegetation. Those and millipedes are what we call detrivores. They eat rotting plant matter and they help essentially that whole soil food web recycle those nutrients. Though only if they multiply in huge amounts and they don't have anything else to eat will they attack little seedlings. Simple way to keep them out of seedlings, cut the bottom off a plastic bottle, take the lid off, put them over, that'll keep them out. You can't climb those. The other thing, if you don't have mulch, they will be eating seedlings. If you have mulch, they will eat the mulch that's rotting because that's what their natural role is. So they are beneficial. If they do grow too much in their numbers, you can probably feed them to the chickens, but ultimately have mulch down because their job is to break down mulch. So make sure, feed what in, I'm a permaculture guy. Permaculture is essentially ecological garden design. And what we do is we always work with nature. We have a saying, feed the soil, not the plants. When you feed the soil, everything else will be kept in balance. And that's a really good way to do it. Okay, how many more questions have we got?
We've got a few more, Angelo. We've got a question, how to keep, I've already done that, how to keep ants away.
Yes.
What about from Sue? Are there local indigenous plants that are known to have the same properties as marigolds and other companion plants?
Oh, yes. I already mentioned the best ones that I've found are the native tall daisy, the Brachysteum diversifolia. but also all the other brachyscomes, the cut leaf daisies with the little purple flowers work really, really well also. Essentially, any of the indigenous daisies will work to attract beneficial insects. There's also a lot of indigenous plants which are of the Apiaceae family, which are the parsley, carrot, dill family, which don't look like parsley, carrot, or dill. There's also native parsley, or it goes under another name. I can't remember it. And that's either an annual, biennial, or perennial. No one seems to agree how long it lives. You can grow that, but there's a whole stack of other ones that you can grow. So just any native, if you want to know exactly what works and works the best, go to something like an indigenous nursery or a native nursery and walk through. About this time of the year is perfect, around November, when everything's in flower, and look where the little hoverflies are. Where you see the hoverflies, because remember, bees can get into deeper flowers that ladybirds, lacewings, and hoverflies and parasitic moths can't get into. So follow the hoverflies. Where you see the hoverflies go, get those plants. But just be aware that, look at the growing requirements of the plants, how much moisture and sun they need, and make sure you can match their growing requirements.
All right, well, we've got another question. Is there a permanent solution to gnats?
The fungus gnats, I'm assuming, yes, there is. You can get the Bacillus thuringiensis, the BT variety Israeliensis, which they sell at a Bully Nut and Garden. I forget what it's sold as there, but it's essentially a fungus gnat control, and it's a bacterium. It's just a powder. You mix it with water, you pour it into your plants, and that bacteria just stays in there. If your plants get too dry and you forget to water them, your plants start wilting and it sort of dries out, you might sort of kill some of the bacteria, but they can also, bacteria form spores, and then they can just come back to life and remultiply. So you apply it once and you never have the problem ever again. And if you ever have to reapply it, you only need a little bit more. So it's Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a bacteria. It's called BT. That's a simple name for it. And it's for fungus gnats. Just ask for the BT for fungus gnats. It's a bacterial pest control, and it works wonders. The other thing I do with fungus gnats is tap the plant, watch them fly up, and vacuum them with my little dustbuster type thing, and it gets rid of the adults. The simple thing that I works also, I've got a whole article on my website. You can also, when you see them racing around doing little laps around the inside of your pot, what I just did is got some pyrethrum, put it on a cotton bud, and just did a little simple ring around there. So when they just walk on it, and they just drop after about 30 seconds. That also gets rid of some of the adults. But if you use the BT in the potting mix, and then use, but the other things, their larvae eat fungus. The only reason why your fungus grows in your potting mix is because you've been overwatering. So cut back on the water a little bit. Let the surface dry out. Even put pebbles as mulch over the top, and that will usually help. See, multi-pronged approach.
Fantastic.
Yes.
All right, we've got another question from Angelica here. I'm needing help identifying what pest is causing damage. Is there a guide she could refer to?
I believe there's a really good pest guide put out by ABC Publishing by a gentleman by the name of Dennis Crawford. Now, I can get the exact name of the book, but it's on my thing. But if you look up Dennis Crawford pests or something like that, garden pests, Dennis is a brilliant entomologist. He's also got an Instagram up, and he has lots of pests on his Instagram and does great photos as well. And he has an awesome book, and it's really good for Australian. I'll actually give you the name of it. Give me 2 seconds. Sorry about this. This is my garden Bible. It's probably not coming up too well. It's called Garden Pests, Diseases and Good Bugs by Dennis Crawford, ABC Books. And Dennis is a really great guy, and he really knows his stuff. I've met him several times during talks and things, and his book is very, very informative. So that's my go-to bug book for Australia.
Awesome, awesome. That, I'm sure that'll be very useful for a lot of people. So we've got another comment here just about a wildlife safe netting. So recently the regulations have changed around what kind of netting you can use on veggie gardens and fruit trees. So it needs to be a smaller netting than previous. Angelo, do you know any more details?
Yes, I do actually. Because where I used to work at Bully Nut and Garden, we preempted that whole thing by about a year or more. If you can put your little pinky, your little finger through the hole, then it's too big. The before there was a lot of black netting, monofilament, like fishing line type netting, sold with really big holes. Birds were getting their heads caught in that. I won't mention a big superstore that sells hardware that used to sell that stuff, but that luckily was banned. They stopped that because birds were then getting strangled in it. And the best netting was the woven netting, which was soft and pliable and white, so it was really visible, so things wouldn't get caught in it. It looks a bit ugly when you drape it over things, but hey, it's netting, it's doing a job. Then what they found is that the government found was that little microbats, which are very, very beneficial. They eat lots of insects as well, and they're in a lot of areas where, a little bit further out from the major city areas, were getting caught in that netting. Even the holes were still too big for them, so they banned it. Now anything, like I said, with a mesh that you can fit your little finger through is way too big. What I tend to use, and what they're selling at Bully Art and Garden, which I've got a good supply of, you all saw the bags that I showed earlier, and the tree cover, which is like a formed fitted thing that goes over a tree. You can also get sheets of it on a roll that is either 2 meters, I think it's 2.5 meters wide or 6 meters wide. It's really, really cheap, by the way. It's 2 millimeter insect exclusion netting. So 2 millimeter is tiny. You can barely fit a matchstick through it. That will keep insects out. It'll keep rats out. It'll keep cockies and rainbow lorikeets out. It will keep birds out. It will keep everything out, including Queensland fruit fly, and it won't harm those little microbats or any of the wildlife. So if you can just use insect exclusion netting, it's the good thing about insect exclusion netting also is when you put it over plants, they can't grow through it, and berries don't get tangled on it. So you just lay it over them and it lifts straight off. You don't end up tangling and damaging your plants too. And for espaliers, what I just did to protect them from possums at Bully Art and Gardens Nursery is I draped it like a sheet over one side and then the other, and just use clothes pegs on the sides. And you can just fold it over your berries on trellises or grapes as well. So it comes in bags. It comes in sleeves that are 30 by 90, double-ended, open-ended. So you can slip it over a whole branch and tie the two ends like a big lolly sort of thing. You can also wrap the insect netting around a fruit tree, tie it to the bottom of the trunk and tie it as high as you can reach, and let the parrots and the birds have the rest of the fruit up the top, because how are you going to get it anyway? So you can get creative with your approach. You can do it fairly cheaply, and it lasts for many, many years. I've had the same netting that I've had for the last probably, goodness, about 5 or 6 years, and I keep on reusing it. So that's really a really good solution. So yeah, so if you've got the old netting, you can't really use it. It's not a good idea because it can tangle, especially like Yarra Ranges where you guys are. I'm guessing you've got a lot more wildlife. Microbats would be more at risk. So yeah, definitely don't use that. Get the insect netting. It's really cheap. It's actually cheaper than the other netting, and it comes in wider sheets. You can just cover whole garden beds. What you can do is essentially create like a teepee, or sticks with string across, or you can get those close hoops, which are a big sort of U-shaped galvanized iron hoops, where you can actually clip them into the garden beds, and there's a wire spring that attaches, so you can put either greenhouse plastic or the netting over it. And with 3 of those, I think they're about $15 each. For about $45, you can cover a whole 1 meter by 4 meter bed easily. So they can cover a lot. And you can also make them out of just sticks and irrigation pipe put over, or bamboo tied. You can get creative how you want to lift the netting off the plants. It's a long answer, but yeah, hopefully that helps.
Awesome. No, lots of great ideas there. And there's also fines for using the old netting as well. So for people to keep in mind that that it's important to change to the smaller netting. And it sounds like that insect netting is a really good
it's a real winner. Yeah.
Great. So we've got one last question. If anyone
Okay.
has any more questions, feel free to pop them in. We've still got a couple of minutes. But we've got a question about blue-tongue lizards and
Yes.
if they are harmful to people. So can they be dangerous?
No, they're absolutely awesome. They're one of the best smell controls. I used to manage the driveway garden in Bulleen Art and Garden in the old days, and I had my little blue-tongue lizards there that would wander through there, and you would find all these crushed snail shells. And because I remember some people, we had some migrant people who weren't familiar with blue-tongue lizards. They go, "There's a snake! There's a snake! There's a snake!" And it was under the rhubarb leaves. And I lift it up and I look, I go, "That's just a blue tongue." And I show it was a lizard. And I remember seeing even one curled up like a little baby between rhubarb leaves, just on a cold morning. So they are perfectly harmless. They are really good for, they're one of the best snail controls because frogs, if you have frogs, they'll eat snails and slugs, but only like small pea-sized ones. If they get bigger, they'll eat whatever they can fit in their mouths. But lizards are really good for snail control. They're one of the best. They'll also eat all your pill bugs. They'll also eat earwigs and everything else. So if you can, you encourage them. And there's any of the Aussie bush foods like the salt bushes, like the nodding salt bush, ruby salt bush, the low one, will attract the blue-tongue lizards, as will midgeon berries, M-I-D-Y-I-M. Midgeon is how it's spelt, midgeon berries. They taste also beautiful. It's probably one of my favorite bush foods. They taste like cool mints. They're really prolific. They take hot and dry. So any of the native bush food plants that produce little berries will attract the lizards. The lizards will mop up most of your insects and all of your snails. Now, normally in permaculture, we resort to ducks as snail and slug control. But luckily, in dry areas where you can't get ducks, if you can attract blue-tongue lizards, they are fantastic. Try to create a habitat for them, give them places to hide. Look up possibly some councils, things they might have, how to build lizard habitats, perhaps. You want to create essentially what the saying with animal habitats, like for frogs, build the environment and they will come. And I just wish I had blue-tongue lizards here. I live 9 k's north of the city. I'm in a city. So unfortunately, we don't get blue tongues. We're lucky to get those little skinks, the little tiny itty-bitty lizards. And they eat insects, but they only eat ants. They're too tiny. So I would love to have blue tongues. So if you can get blue tongues in, grow more of those plants that produce berries, so that gives them an alternative food source as well. And grow lots of dense native ground cover plants that they can hide under, because that will keep. And some they like rocks to actually sit on because they're cold-blooded. So if you put some rocks as like little perches, they'll climb up on the spring morning and sunbake, and they will bask there and they'll warm themselves up.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we've got one last question. So just some more advice on rats.
Yes. Good point. Yes, because I was going to discuss the technique that I've discovered. I found that rats are very, very, very intelligent and they learn. And the reason why they survive so long is because they can work their way around human traps and things. So what I found works really well if you're going to use baited traps is essentially lay the traps, but don't set them. So whether it's a cage trap or whether it's a snap trap or whatever it's going to be, whether it's a humane trap, jam the trap open somehow so it won't kill or trap the rats. Put the food out for one day, they'll all come. I know all this because I've got a little wildlife trail camera that does infrared and it can see in the dark. And I saw a video and I thought, test this. I've been doing this all this week actually. And I've been watching them on the video. I've got the videos, which once I put my YouTube channel up, hopefully next month, I will post these up. So what you do, set the traps, bait the traps, and lay them, but don't set them. If you have to set them, jam them open with a bit of wire or something so that they can't snap shut or close shut or whatever, and give them a free feed. They'll be a bit hesitant the first day. Then the next day, because they come at night, by the way, they're nocturnal, do the same thing again. Just see what's been eaten. Certain things they like. I found they they do tend to sometimes like chocolate. They like peanut butter. They're really fond of peanut butter because it's aromatic. They've got a very good sense of smell. Use gloves, rubber gloves when you're handling. They are very aware of human scent. So wash anything that you've been touching if you're going to lay the trap. If they smell humans or dogs, they will run away. They absolutely hate dogs and humans. They're terrified, senseless. That's how they've evolved to be aware of those two things more than anything else. So gloves, put your peanut butter. You can try other sweets, bits of bread with peanut butter usually works well because that gives you something to put the thing on and use it as a bait. Cheese does not work that well. It crumbles. It doesn't really work well at all. That's not a very good one. Just anything sweet, fruit as well, bits of certain fruit they do like, and lay it for them. Let them have a feast the first night. See what's been eaten. That way you know what they're eating and what they're not eating. Come back the next night, lay it out again. Let them have another free feed. Third night, set all the traps. So they're all sprung, loaded, and ready to go. What will happen is, if you can watch it on video, what you'll see is they will be familiarized with the area. They know there's no humans or dogs around. They know that these objects that are traps or cages are safe. They can go in and out as they please. And they go in the next time and they all get caught. And that works really, really well. I've also seen some of those plastic, the little, it's like a yellow lid that goes on a 20-litre plastic drum with a little hinge door and a little ladder. There's ones that are like seesaws or rollers, and they work better for mice. Mice will run up on them. You put some peanut butter on the thing and they will try to get on the roller and they roll off, or they fall down the little walk the plank pirate style. So those will work on mice. Rats need traps, but you have to get them accustomed to the thing. You have to let them know that it's safe, and then they will go. Only then you'll be able to trap them, and you have to be very patient and persistent. So I'm finding that rather than baiting them, which can get very, very expensive, because the baits, by the way, unless you buy bucket for about $50 of the blocks, which make the rats toxic and poison any wildlife, what happens is they can eat a whole block. That's more than a lethal dose, but they don't die straight away. They'll die in about a week, but you don't know when or where they're going to die. And if you put more blocks out for the other rats, they might eat more. So one rat might go through 6 or 8 blocks and might cost you $5 or $6 to actually dispense with. Whereas you do it with patience with a trap, you can catch them. And if you don't want to hurt them, you can use those humane cage traps and set those out, trap them, and go take them elsewhere to release them. If you're not fussed and you want to actually finish them off, you can, and you know that no one's poisoned them. What I've seen people do in the States is they will set the mouse and rat traps. They'll collect all the mice and rats. They'll then go out into a wilderness area and lay them down for all the wildlife to feast on. I've seen them put cameras out there. They have different wildlife to us. Obviously, they have things like raccoons and opossums there. Possums got long noses and sharp teeth, and they eat meat, which are horrible little demonic things. But our possums are much cuter, but they don't eat meat. But different things might eat them. So the idea is that you're not putting any of that to waste, but you have to be really sure that no one's poisoned those things, though. And only then can you put them back into the cycle of nature. Otherwise, you just bury them if you need to, or you can, if you're squeamish, you can put them in the rubbish bin, which can get a bit smelly. But any of those will work. So hopefully that sort of helps with rats and mice. The other thing I found, that you can get those little ultrasonic things that you stake into the garden, and if they sense any movement, they make a real loud noise. You can either set it so you can hear it or you can't hear it, and they flash lights. They will work. Just be warned, though, if you have cats and dogs, they will get deafened by those things. They will hate it and will drive them mad. So only if you're out in the middle of nowhere and there's no dogs or cats around, possums will get deterred by it too, but possums eventually figure that out and so it's not a problem. But those also help as well. The only way to stop rats and mice is to actually put some kind of a physical barrier, and it's very hard because they can chew through netting. If you put netting over things and you see a little hole chewed about, the size of, your thumb or a little bit bigger, you've got mice. If you see a huge hole chewed through, you've got rats. Possums and birds cannot chew netting, not even parrots. Even though a parrot could, they don't. So just be aware, that's how you know what you've got. Hopefully that helps. Keep cross it, you don't get too many of them.
Lovely. Well, we're out of time now.
Yeah.
So I'm sure everyone will join me in saying a massive thank you to Angelo for sharing all of your knowledge on natural pest control this evening.
Yes.
I feel like you're an absolute wealth of knowledge. You know so much, and have shared all of that with us this evening. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
And if you do have any other questions, you can go onto Angelo's website that we posted earlier. And
there's my email address, which I was just busy typing, so apologies for looking down. So deep_green@optusnet.com.au, and you can email me directly as well from there. Or as Olivia was saying, you can go to my website and go to contacts or about us or whatever it is, and I've got my email there as well. So back to you, Olivia. Sorry.
Fantastic. Yep. No, that's great. That's great. And thank you to everybody for tuning into the webinar. We will pop the link up to the webinar on the Yarra Rangers page. You'll also have access to the slides as well. So yeah, I hope you're all logging off with lots of new information and lots of ideas on what you can do to put the chemicals away and manage the pests naturally. So also, if you have any further questions about the Gardens for Harvest program, you can email me at sustainability@yarrarangers.vic.gov.au. Yes, and thank you again so much, and hope you all have a lovely evening.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that.